I'm joined by political analyst and commentator Bill Crane from the state of Georgia. Let's talk about Santos. As Nathan points out, some Republican lawmakers saying he's got to resign the seat, but the House Speaker isn't one of them. Talk to us about how you see this playing out.
Well, it doesn't often get mentioned, but when Nancy Pelosi was finishing up her last term as Speaker, she had only a 5-vote majority of Democrats over Republicans. As long as you've got one or two, unless there are a lot of people out sick, you can still pass legislation. But it doesn't do very much good on the other side when the Democrats control the U.S. Senate. I think George Santos is an embarrassment. I think in many ways Marjorie Taylor Greene is an embarrassment. Both parties, Republican and Democratic here in the United States, have a primary system that favors extremists. So we see, in particularly congressional primaries, when an open seat comes, you look at the census tract data and what the likelihood is, if it's a Republican or a Democratic safe seat, and you can expect a nominee, if it's a red seat or a blue seat, to be to the fringe of either party. So we end up with people like AOC and her squad of 5, or Marjorie Taylor Greene and George Santos, who don't represent the majority of Americans, who don't represent necessarily the majority in their district, and really don't have anything to say to the people that live in the political center, which is a large swath of the American population.
Well, there's another Republican in the news, too, because of legal troubles, and that's, of course, former President Donald Trump. He just lost in court in New York, a jury determining he sexually abused and defamed E. Jean Carroll. That also has sparked some Republicans to say he shouldn't be the standard bearer for his party, but he's also facing political charges, potential charges in your state. That could come in a couple of months, additional charges. What's likely to happen there?
With President Trump, I think you've got 2 of the many legal proceedings that are rolling forward against him that could do him long-term damage in the campaign in 2024. One is whatever happens with the recommendations of the January 6th committee out of Congress, which does recommend, or they did recommend to the U.S. Justice Department indictments and criminal charges. And the other is the Georgia investigation, which you referenced, which seems to be narrowing in scope. 8 individuals who had been focus of investigation were released or entered into plea agreements in the last week, which would tend to tell you that they made plea agreements giving information up on who? Well, that would probably be Donald Trump, or the president's campaign, or his handlers, or people at the senior level in the White House at the time. I don't think the Jean Carroll case or the other case out of New York do him a lot of harm. It's a state he's not going to carry. He hasn't been popular in New York City since the late 1990s, but he still plays very well with a certain segment of the Republican population. I do not believe eventually that he will be the Republican nominee.
He's also going to be on the air here in the U.S. In about 15 minutes or so in a town hall session in New Hampshire. CNN's gotten a lot of criticism for normalizing Trump, especially on the heels of this. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't know that they're normalizing Donald Trump, but they're certainly giving him a tremendous amount of coverage and airtime. And so if you look back at the 2016 campaign, besides the fact that he had a primetime network television show here on NBC, the national broadcasting system, for 14 years, from the time he came down the escalator at Trump Tower until those presidential preference primaries started, his free airtime advantage was in the hundreds, if not double hundreds of millions of dollars over every other of the 14 candidates in the field. So it wasn't necessarily a surprise that he started winning primaries by plurality and did better actually in blue states than he did in red. When he was running in a Republican state, he still won oftentimes by plurality or came in second, but the margins were tighter. He did better with disaffected Democrats and people who hadn't voted in a long time who supported his candidacy during the 2016 primaries.
Bill Crane joining us from Georgia. Thanks so much for your insights.
Take care.